Hey y'all, this is Shlyn, and there's a video I've been wanting to make that's been on my mind for a while now about things I saw before the third season of Picard came out regarding what is real Star Trek. I really debated on whether or not to make this video, considering I've never done anything like this before, but I thought it might help me get my thoughts out there and let me vent, so here we go. First things first, a little bit about me. I've been a fan of Star Trek for years, for as long as I can remember. I was dressing up as the characters, going outside to pretend I was going on away missions to discover some new alien life. I tried to get my friends into it, though. It often ended up as just me coming up with stories in my head to play out in my backyard. I was writing Star Trek fanfiction long before I even knew what fanfiction was. I even had my third grade teacher read it out loud to the class once or twice. Yeah, looking back, that was rather embarrassing. I have two very distinct memories of Star Trek from a young age. One of my very first memories that I remember vividly is seeing the beginning scene from the Generations movie where the Next Generation crew is on the holodeck. I think my dad was watching it and I walked through. I saw it, knew what it was because my parents were also big Star Trek fans, and I wanted to see more. The other memory is, specifically, the scene from the TNG episode The Arsenal of Freedom, where Dr. Crusher falls into a pit and Captain Picard has to tend to her wounds. For some reason, those two scenes from the movie and the show are what stuck with me as a kid. I was hooked. I loved it. The Star Trek universe was a place I wanted to go, to live in. My two goals in life at the time were to become Captain of the Enterprise and marry Data. I mean, who wouldn't? Star Trek was this wonderful and fantastic thing that I simply could not get enough of. I craved content. I would go to Blockbuster and rent the movies over and over again. I found a VHS of Generations in a drawer at the house, and that became my favorite thing. Before you say anything, looking back at the movie now, I can see why people don't like it, especially with the Kirk thing at the end, and Captain Picard and the whole Nexus thing. Whatever. But as a kid, this was the only Star Trek content I had constantly at my fingertips. To watch the show, I had to wait until they came on TV. Getting a DVR was a game changer. But I watched that movie on repeat until I had it memorized, and it has a very special place in my heart, despite its flaws. Aside from the shows, I managed to get my hands on a few Star Trek magazines that I cherished. I pored over them, taking in everything I could. That was also where I first learned of Doctor Who, but I got really into that a few years later, but that's a story for another time. My Star Trek experience was purely stuff that had come out before I was born or ended a few years after. Enterprise ended when I was 8, but I never actually watched it until high school. I didn't think I'd like it, but I ended up really enjoying it. Every day after school, I'd go to my grandmother's to watch an episode of Voyager that I'd recorded. At home, I'd watch whatever Deep Space Nine, original series, and Next Generation episode that had been recorded since the last time. But as much as I loved watching the old shows at the time for the first time, I always wished I could experience new Star Trek, especially if it was a movie so I could see it on the big screen. Enter Star Trek 2009. I was pumped. I was so freaking excited, though perhaps a little wary, because even at the age of 11 I thought, how could these people ever be as good as the original actors? Not even thinking about how the writing could be the much bigger issue. I saw the movie. I think I even saw it twice in the theater, a measly number compared to the 6 times I saw Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Give me a break, I was 10 with a huge crush on Harrison Ford. Looking back, I think I only liked it because it was Star Trek. It had the name in big, bold letters, and that was all that mattered. I never watched it again after that, even though I bought the DVD. I even have commemorative glasses featuring the characters from Burger King or McDonald's or Wendy's. I don't remember where I got them exactly, but I have them. I was 16 when Into Darkness came out, and I had no desire to go see it. I couldn't have cared less about it, and I have not seen it to this day. It was around this time that I realized just why I didn't like the 2009 movie, and why I was avoiding Into Darkness like everything. It didn't feel like Star Trek anymore. I didn't know anything about the Kelvin timeline or anything like that. All I knew was they had changed the canon, and I didn't like it. The thing that bothered me the most was that people, like a lot of my friends, would watch these reboot movies and think this is what Star Trek is, and it's not. At all. They'll never know the true joy that was the older shows. After all, space battles and explosions are much more exciting than moral dilemmas and more cerebral things that the shows offered. I've never seen Star Trek Beyond either. I was disappointed but content to stick with the shows and the older movies at the time. I still am. I still do rewatches all the time. Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is one of my comfort movies. I cry every time I watch that scene in the motion picture where Kirk and Scotty see the Enterprise again for the first time, as I'm sure everyone else did in the movie theaters in 1979. Then in comes Star Trek Discovery, or as I prefer to call it, STD. Now, full disclosure, I've only ever seen the first episode, which I only watched back when Paramount had it free on their YouTube channel. Everything else I know about it comes from reviews I watched on YouTube. All I know is, from that first episode, it felt like a generic sci-fi show with the Star Trek title plastered on the front and familiar Trek technobabble that honestly felt so out of place. It was jarring to hear. Now, none of this is me saying that people can't or shouldn't enjoy new Trek that's being released. If you like it, that's great. I'm glad you do. But it's not for me. And for a while, I couldn't figure out why I felt that way, besides perhaps the more obvious things like the writing, which seems pretty poor to me, characterizations, the bastardization of the characters and races, etc. All I knew was that I was sad I couldn't be more excited about something I had loved for so long. Something I had loved was getting new content. But it wasn't the Star Trek I grew up watching. No matter how many members of the old cast came back or how many callbacks there were, nothing made me feel nostalgic for any of the new shows. And upon thinking about it, I realized that all of the new stuff, despite their flash and J.J. Abrams lens flares, new Trek had lost the one thing that made old Trek so special. Hope. At the core of it all, Star Trek had hope. Humanity was constantly striving to become better. The future was hopeful, and watching the shows in the original series movies, I'm not counting the TNG ones because they felt darker overall, provided an escape. It made you think, yeah, someday that could be us out there. The world, the galaxy, is a better place overall. Sure, there were still hardships and conflicts and corruption, but nothing ever felt bleak or hopeless, except maybe the Dominion and Xindi wars. But now, Star Trek has lost that escapism. They forced current modern-day problems into futuristic shows, all out refusing to let you get away from it. And I know before you come at me with, "But Schlinn, Star Trek has always done that. Star Trek has always been political." Yes, I know, but it was done with a thing we seem to have lost called good writing, good storytelling. Everything was written in a way that wasn't shoving an agenda or idea down the viewer's throat. It flowed naturally with the story, and it was typically something external that the crews were having to deal with. Whether it was the Vietnam allegory in A Private Little War, or the same-sex kiss in DS9's episode Rejoined, the kiss made total sense within the context of the episode. No one made a big deal about Dax and Lenara's still-present attraction. It wasn't shocking, except maybe to the audience at the time. Within the confines of the show, it was just accepted as, oh yeah, this happens. The only reason it's a problem is because the Trill don't want the symbiotes reassociating with the same people over and over, not because they're both women. If that was written today, however, the main issue would likely have been because they were both women. And for some reason bigotry is suddenly alive and well when it hadn't been in previous shows. Or, heck, take the first televised interracial kiss between Kirk and Uhura. Sure, it stirred the pot with the viewers, but within the context of the show, the issue was Kirk was Uhura's superior. It was fraternization, even if they were more or less being forced to kiss. All I'm saying is that things weren't made a big deal of within the shows themselves. It was just how things went. That was how they were written. They were part of the story that was woven and told in such a way that the captains and crews were often faced with external moral dilemmas because Gene Roddenberry didn't want there to be interpersonal drama among the crew that they typically solved with their minds. To quote the original series writer's guide, "Yes, we want you to have something to say, but say it entertainingly as you do on any other show. We don't need essays, however brilliant." And to discuss a recent Den of Geek article talking about real Trek, I've got a lot to say about that. When people say, "That's not Trek," about the new shows, they're saying that because these new shows have failed to meet the well-established standard that has become expected of Star Trek. People might have said the same thing about TNG, that this could never compare to the original series, it'll never be real Trek, but you know what? It proved itself, as did DS9, my all-time favorite, and Voyager and Enterprise. They aren't perfect, but the viewers aren't looking for perfect. They're looking for something entertaining. And when something feels like a slog to watch, and the beloved characters you used to watch get thrown into these dark and gory stories and curse all the time, that's not entertainment. I'm not here for nihilism. Humanity was supposed to have a utopian future, a future that we humans today should strive for, that might occasionally be challenged by external forces. We're then forced to look at ourselves and figure out our place in the galaxy, and then, in the end, end up stronger than before. And when you take away the core of what made Star Trek, then the show becomes a generic sci-fi that lost what made it stand the test of time. The argument of new Trek being real Trek or not real Trek is a dumb excuse for the writers and showrunners to bash the fans that don't like what they're putting out. You have a dedicated fan base that knows Trek backwards and forwards, and a lot of them know real Trek when they see it because they recognize what made Star Trek amazing in the first place. Looking back at the older shows and movies, they feel timeless. Sure, TNG, DS9, and Voyager might have all been made in the 90s, but you don't even think about that when you're watching it, because it feels futuristic. Same with the original series. Yeah, some of it might feel a little dated, but it still feels like you're watching some fantastic thing from the future, a future you want to be a part of. Modern day Trek has taken that hope and utopia and made it into a dystopia, all for the sake of moving from one crisis to the next for the drama of it all. To follow the trend of dark and gritty TV shows, making it all feel like these things could be happening today and not centuries into the future. Star Trek was and is for all ages. It was for me as a 5 and 6 year old who watched with wide-eyed wonder at this dream world I hoped would exist someday. It was for my mom watching the original series, dreaming about being in space on the Enterprise. It was for all the kids and adults that have made it into this lasting, beloved phenomenon, a worldwide community that comes together for the shared love of this hopeful future. The hope of Star Trek has touched generations, has shaped lives, has saved lives. I suppose only time will tell if new Trek will have the same lasting impact. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've become too cynical and I too have lost that hope. Maybe new Trek will spark the same fanaticism the real Trek has, but I just can't see it. It feels to me like new Trek will get lost among the rest of its contemporaries as just generic sci-fi. There's nothing new or special about it, as it's following the same formula as everything else nowadays. Drama and crisis filled, upping the stakes from one episode to the next, all just to keep eyes on it. Not because it's a good and compelling story, and that's the crux of it all. Star Trek has lost the ability to tell good and compelling stories because, what, the audience needs fast-paced dramas because our attention spans are now that of goldfish? I can tell you right now that good, compelling, well-written stories are all we want. Give me a show that makes me think. Give me a show that makes me question how I would handle a situation like Picard being asked to judge a being so powerful he was able to wipe out an entire race of people with a single thought, all because he thought a few of them killed his wife. Give me a show with nuanced characters, where sometimes you love them, other times you can't stand them, but you'll always like them. Star Trek has the ability to instill a feeling within you that feels so new and yet so nostalgic at the same time. I mentioned earlier that the Enterprise scene in the motion picture makes me cry. I might not have had the original experience of thinking I'd never get to see Kirk and his crew in the Enterprise ever again, and then suddenly, there it is on the big screen, with the theater so quiet you could hear a pin drop. But I can feel that when I watch that scene. I feel the poignancy of the moment as if I'm experiencing it for the first time every time I watch it with that gloriously slowed rendition of the theme. With its hope, Star Trek lost its heart. It lost its sense of place in the universe. It lost its fun and its sense of adventure and discovery. Whatever happened to seeking out new life and new civilizations? Modern Trek is boldly going where every other modern show has already gone, down a rabbit hole of nihilism and pandering to fans that I would wager don't even really care about the show's legacy. It's dark, nihilistic, focused too much on jumping from one crisis to the next with no real regard to giving the characters their due and building the relationships between them. We're told what to think about them, rather than getting to know them through their actions and deeds. It's as though they tried to take what Deep Space Nine did successfully and build upon it, but that's a video for another day. In the end, I'll always love Star Trek. Nothing can take that away from me. But I wish I could truly be excited for new Trek. Picard Season 3 is probably about as close as I'll ever get, but that's a topic for the next video. But that's what I wanted and needed to say. I miss the old Trek. I miss the hope. I miss the heart. And hopefully someday we can get back to that, but it's not looking very promising. So, until next time, this is Shlyn signing out.